How can we balance development alongside performance? With younger players, is it better to focus on winning as much as possible and hoping that'll lead to more players coming through? Or to take on more of a broader development focus, developing as many as possible to ensure all have the best opportunity of reaching the top level and to give us more options when they do get to adult level? Conor Shannon is performance and talent development lead. His role focused specifically on merging both of those together. How can we develop both players and coaches as effectively as possible, while at the same time providing opportunities to win various competitions such as minor and schools All-Irelands? We take a look at his overall approach, how Clare GAA are recruiting and holding on to their coaches, developing players through to adult level, while at the same time remaining competitive and winning minor hurling All-Irelands. We also looked at Clare GAA's recent research, looking at the impact of bio-banding their players to see the various positive benefits, but also some of the things we need to be aware of when heading into trialling strategies such as this. Really interesting conversation with a young man with loads of experience at the forefront of developing young players in GAA. So Conor, you're new enough to the role, performance and talent development lead. It sounds like sounds really impressive when you look at it on LinkedIn, but what does it actually mean?
Yeah, so I suppose it's a nice fancy title, alright, but the nuts and bolts of it really are I oversee the athletic development of under 14 to under 20 across hurling and football in the county. So again, main areas of focus will be the athletic development provision and what we're doing from that perspective. I suppose we work off the ethos of availability is your best ability. So that's what we're trying to promote right the way through the system. So that underpins everything we do from a coaching perspective, and a development perspective, holistically with their educational workshops and things like that. And I suppose ultimately it wouldn't be feasible without the coaches we have and the interns we have. We've a vast volume of players involved. So without those people on the ground, it wouldn't be possible to deliver what we're delivering to the standard. So it makes my job easier in that I'm overseeing that, and those people are really helpful in terms of implementing it. Look, we just want to do consistent basics well, and basics done consistently well, and I think that's the key to the role really. And again, I suppose a close link to what coaching and games are doing as well. That's ultimately what the development provision is to try and enhance what our hurlers and footballers are doing and keep them on the pitch and make them as best athletically as they can to express themselves.
And you split in like your designing programs of 14 to 20 to make sure they follow along, but you're also recruiting in the various coaches and interns there, and you have to balance a bit of here's what I think the perfect program looks like, but here's what it looks like me giving it to someone else and them then delivering it.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. I suppose we've got a long-term athletic development plan that I would have developed in conjunction with. So we've a couple of kind of full-time coaches, if you want to call them that work about 20 hours a week with us, and then we've another coach in a similar capacity on less hours. So they ultimately would have helped design what we're doing, and they're the ones that implement it alongside myself. So they're allocated an age grade where possible. So one of them will be with the 14s, one will be with the 15s, one will be with the 16s. So there is that kind of umbrella overview of what we'd like to see within the programme and what we'd like to see happening. But I suppose there is that flexibility within that too, that they can, use their own experience to maybe tailor things to suit what they're seeing in front of them. And I think that's a nice little caveat that we have going in Clare, in that rather than it being one person stretched across 6 age grades and 2 codes, we have a person dedicated to an age grade that gets to know those players and can see what works and what doesn't work maybe at each age grade. Yeah, the schools is a really low hanging fruit for us from that athletic development perspective, in that again we're going with the approach of as many as possible for as long as possible. So with that in mind, and with the amount of coaches we have, and with access to facilities and things like that, the schools is a really good opportunity to get at the under 14s and 15s. So we would do the vast majority of their athletic development through their post-primary school during the school term. So I suppose luckily from a football perspective, the vast majority of them go to school in Clare. So nearly 100% of under 14s and 15s would be serviced within those sessions, and then maybe 85% of the hurlers would attend the school in Clare. So we're getting the vast majority of those as well. So the 14s and 15s would do their athletic development within their school, usually before school, and those same coaches that are with them on a Saturday with their respective age grades deliver those sessions too. So there's great consistency there in that. They have them on the pitch for their movement mechanics, but they also have them in the gym to develop those competencies too. So again, that's really positive in that you're constantly building that relationship with those players too. And it's a real advantage of our system.
And has been developing their relationships with the schools been useful as well? Because like you've some quite successful schools, traditionally like Flannan's were for a long time, and then even with Tulla winning Harty there a couple of years ago as well. It's good like to have the relationship that you see each other, but it's possibly useful for recruiting coaches a bit maybe as well.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Like I suppose that'd be primarily me all's job, but like if you're to look at our academy squad coaches, hurling football, a lot of them are teachers, and I suppose you can speak about a club schooling from a club perspective to recruit players, but like it's a big avenue for us to get coaches and get good coaches. Like typically the better coaches are usually teachers, particularly with the academy squad age kids. They're able to get them, I suppose, that maybe ex-players mightn't understand how to deal with a 14 or 15-year-old, but if a teacher's seen them every day for whatever 8 months of the year, it's a little bit easier for them to understand it. So I suppose Terence with the under-20s often references the success of the Tipperary schools, and that's kind of backbone, and there are minors, 20 seniors at the minute, so I think if you can get that school setting right, you're on to a winner. So that's an area that we're trying to constantly develop and improve. But I think from a athletic development perspective, we have a good thing going, and we just have to try and constantly embed that and improve it as the years and months go on.
And just last bit on your specific role, do you do much with clubs, say players coming into squads? Do any of them have any kind of grounding in any of the athletic development stuff when they come in from doing work with their clubs? I know those players who may be on the fringes of they might make a squad 14, don't at 15. Like, is there support stuff in place for clubs to help bring them along a bit? Maybe if a coach develops his or her knowledge a little bit at club level, are they in a position to step up to county or there? Is there a feasibility in your job to go that far, or you're just too consumed with more the specific county stuff?
Yeah, like it's at the minute we haven't got there quite yet. It's certainly an area we want to tackle. And I think the off season is probably where we'll go after to try and like the new GAA athletic development course is excellent, and I know Aidan has ran a couple of pilots in Cork, and Jason and Kerry, and again that's a good opportunity to recruit coaches. Look, I suppose Emmett, who's with our 16s primarily, he would reference that it's very, very obvious within that cohort to see the players from clubs that are embellishing a really good athletic development programme. So I suppose if we can get players in who are exposed to good athletic development within their club, then that ultimately makes our job a lot easier. So I suppose the GAA is going after that model of self-sufficient clubs. I think if we can get ideally some person within each club that has some level of expertise in athletic development, and it doesn't have to be, a sports scientist, if they simply complete that course and maybe do a little bit of mentoring with ourselves to simply run something that's safe and effective, and ultimately the functional patterns within a club setting, like that'll make our job a lot easier when they come to us at 13 and 14, because we don't have to spend that time maybe embedding good habits. But it's definitely an area that we want to improve, and we want to try and upskill our clubs and coaches. It's something that we do have in the work plan down the line. But again, definitely the clubs who have that, and to be fair and clear, there are clubs with really good people involved, and you'll see it in social media, and you'll see it from some of the facilities we have. And it's very obvious those players in our system who have that, they grasp things a lot quicker, and it makes our job easier then.
And you'd hope then that kind of expand over time. If a few people do a course now and work as the lead in their club, 4 or 5 years later someone else in the club might, and they end up with their own internal mentor and stuff. That brings us on, and the main thing I want to look at today was to say your performance and talent development lead. Like, in a way, are they Are they the same thing or are they completely different, and where do they dovetail or not? Like performance you would see as purely focused on let's win as much as possible, whereas development isn't. Like you don't always have to be winning, or oftentimes you don't win to develop really well. How do they sit alongside each other or dovetail against each other, particularly like big picture stuff, and how does that filter down then to day what it looks like?
Yeah, so I suppose within Clare, in both codes, rightly or wrongly, we've kind of an ethos that we're not overly concerned with winning till under 20s or seniors. We're more so concerned of trying to get as many players as possible through our system and playing with their clubs and staying in the game. I suppose initially, if you say the word performance, you probably do reflect on winning and trophies and medals and things, but I suppose the way we view performance is that it doesn't necessarily have to be from winning at minor or winning at squad level. It's very much trying to develop good habits. So, for example, I suppose Gaelic football now, there's going to be a big value on kicking the ball. So performance to our under 14s might be, Johnny had 10 kick passes to grass in game 1. In game 2 he had 13. That's performance to us. So we're not worried about the scoreline or winning matches at that level. It's more so, can we develop good habits athletically and from a football and hurling perspective, and in trying to reshape maybe what we view performance as. So it doesn't necessarily have to mean winning. I think within and outside the system, players are going to have an opportunity to win. So you look at the post-primary school competitions you referenced there. So the players within our 15s and 16s and 17s, they'll be playing those competitions. So there is that exposure to competition for them. So we don't necessarily need to be focusing on winning within our system. We want to keep as many involved as possible for as long as possible with as good an experience as possible. So what that looks like is focusing on the key skills of the game that relate well to being successful at adult club level and in secondary to that adult inter-county level. So for us, it's reshaping those metrics. Performance doesn't have to be winning a game or winning a competition. It can be, if we're focusing on a key skill for the month and we have a game at the end of the month, how well do our players do in that skill, in that environment. So look, players and teenagers, they are competitive by nature, so they're going to want to win themselves. So I think from a coaching perspective, it's maybe trying to zoom out of that short-term focus on winning to reshaping what performance is and rewarding those metrics. I think a really good example of that is the Celtic Challenge competition. Like this year in Clare, we had 2 panels. So we had about 80 minor players, give or take, exposed to an expansive series of games and really good opportunities to learn and develop. So what we get out of that from 18, 19, 20 and a club perspective is going to be really exciting. It's great to get to the minor final, but more importantly for us is can we transition those players now to 18s, 19s to 20s and to playing for their clubs, because it'd be a real shame if they didn't. I think the Celtic Challenge is a great competition in that there's a really good example of why that's important this year. And the 3 of the players that started for us in the Munster final under 20, they were on the back end of Celtic Challenge panels at minor. So I suppose if we didn't go along with that philosophy of keeping everyone involved, we might have lost those boys. So that's kind of where our ethos is. Performance isn't necessarily winning, and we want to try and transition as many as we can to 20s to seniors and to playing with their clubs.
That's interesting, your point to start saying your priorities, like winning doesn't really become a priority till 20 and senior. Like you were senior All-Ireland champions last year and minor All-Ireland champions the year before. So it's like the development doesn't get in the way of what a lot of people term performance as well. Like by trying to develop as many as possible, there is still a good chance that you might win stuff along the way. It's just not seen as the main performance indicator that you're targeting. It just might happen along the way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So performance for us is how many players can we get through, how many coaches can we get through, and if we win along the way, great. But it's not the primary indicator of how well our system is doing.
And from athletic development point of view, does that change some of the things you might do at the various stages? For example, like I would assume everyone still just it's a lot of introductory stuff at 14, trying to develop that more at 15. But particularly at minor, like you might see a team and they're like, at minor we want to be as fit as we possibly can be, and there's a load of volume of relatively high intensity work thrown at them, so come championship time in minor they're really, really fit. But there might be a payoff to that at age 18 or 19 they're quite tired from it. It might like just turn them off it or blunt some of their potential skill or game sense development. Is that something you have to balance or have conversations with minor managers, or just make sure they're aware of that going into the role?
Yeah, for sure. And I think if you're looking at how that translates to under 20s, I know for us that's probably the year or the age band where we've most injuries, and it's the same consistently across county, and it's probably linked back to what you touched on there, that some of those boys are 16, and again when you put an All-Ireland competition in front of coaches and managers, they maybe tend to train them like adults, but luckily within our system we have, I suppose, Ger, who's with the minor hurlers as manager this year, he's been within our system the last couple of years. Damien O'Halloran, who's their coach, has been there with them since they won that minor All-Ireland, so they understand that we're trying to future-proof them for 5 and 10 years down the line. We're not trying to fast track talent. We're trying to future-proof it. So I think, speaking to Derek, the injury incidence within the minors wasn't too catastrophic this year. I think they had a fairly low incidence of injury, and they had the vast majority of their panel available for selection every day, and within that they had constant change to their 24, which is a real positive indicator of health within the squad. So I think that's a really important consideration too, that they are 16 and 17. Some of them are still developing. Again, I mentioned 3 of the boys that started in the under 20 final for us. At minor, they physically weren't ready to compete, but we kept them within the system, and by the time they were 20, they were ready. So I suppose for those boys, if they were blunted and slammed with a load at 16 or 17, we mightn't have had them at 20. So it's definitely a balancing act, and it requires a lot of education from our perspective, but we're lucky in that we have people who get it within those squads, and they see the long term picture that it's a hurling career, not a hurling year. So what happens at 17 with a Paul Rogers or Lee Murphy isn't going to colour the rest of his career. We're trying to make sure that they get to 18s, they get to 20s, and then they play adult for their club and hopefully their county. And that's kind of the ethos we take, and it's again, it requires buy-in, but I think we have that in spades at the minute.
I want to come back to the keeping coaches in your system for a while in a second, but I just want to go first to, you're saying there about minimal enough injuries at under 18. And there's 2 kind of offshoots of this. First is, like, what kind of work are you doing to make sure that the injuries aren't occurring while still loading players? But how do you balance that across? Because there are times when performance is important. If one of the school teams gets to a Harty final, you're not ringing up teachers saying, look, it's all about development, make sure everyone gets a bit of playing time. Like, you want them to go and perform at the highest level. Same if you get to a Munster minor final, not saying, okay, we'll give the full 20 players a run now, so more of them exposed to games. No, you're definitely going to win that game. Performance is important in that time. How are you managing all of the physical around that to think that we're preparing them for like long term, so they're building up the loads gradually, while still making sure if we do get to a Munster final, we're all in on that, we can perform as close to a peak as is relevant for those players at this particular time?
Yeah, and I think a strength of that is the minor S&C coach this year, Derek Morris. He's involved with us as one of those coaches in our system. So he gets what we're trying to do from a physical perspective. And again, Damien O'Halloran, again within that coaching system, he's a dream to work with from an athletic development perspective. And I suppose Derek, because he's embedded within our system, he knows what we're trying to do from 14s, 15s, 16s up until 20s. So again, I suppose the strength of our system is we have someone with a competitive team that works with us from a developmental perspective as well. So again, you touched on the importance of schools earlier. That's where the relationship with those schools comes to pay dividends, in that A lot of those minor players would have been playing hearty. So, Ger and Derek would have managed their load in conjunction with the schools to make sure that, look, they were available for their schools first and foremost, and able to perform for their schools first and foremost. So it would have taken a lot of planning and periodisation on Derek's end and Damien's end to make sure that they were stressing them appropriately at the right times, but keeping them on the pitch to perform for Harty. And then when they came back, I know a few of them had a little bit of a period of downtime to build them down, to build them back up again. But again, I suppose our key principles being its basics done consistently well. Derek has embedded that philosophy with the players. They did their strength training in season. I think that the planning and loading piece with coaches is a key principle there, and that Damien gets that they are 17, they're not adult players. I know from speaking with Derek, he was very receptive to high weeks, low weeks, high sessions, low sessions within the season. So I suppose when we got to maybe February or March, like those boys weren't really active from a school perspective, and the minors had sole access to them for the majority of the championship, so it made it a little bit easier. Whereas 20s, for example, you have to balance club, fresher, hearty. That's kind of Pandora's box of load. Whereas minor, once they kind of come out of the school setting relatively fresh and fit, it can be a little bit easier to manage them then. But again, it goes back to coach education, and it goes back to, it's irrelevant what sort of a model we have from an athletic development perspective if the coaches don't buy into it. So I think that's a testament to how receptive Ger and Damien, the lads were with the minors, that they did understand when to push, when to pull, and I suppose ultimately we kept them on field for the vast majority of it.
And speaking, you mentioned coach education there. I just want this next little piece to be a piece of education for coaches that are listening. You mentioned there about high and low training and low weeks. Let's just say, for example, a new minor coach is coming in with you for next year, and you want to give them just a little bit of an education. You haven't worked with them before, but they're involved. What are a couple of big rocks that you want them to use as guiding principles, and just touch on them, like what is high and low? What does that look like, or what are some of the key differences and why might you use it?
Yeah, so I suppose a big rock for me is that we're exposing our players to a sprint exposure within the week. So for me, when I'm designing a training week, it typically centres around when can we give them an exposure to max speed throughout the season, to try and, I suppose, develop their speed first of all, but make them robust to soft tissue injury secondary to that. I suppose that the key piece is the planning and working with the end goal in mind. So sitting down, seeing when the first game of championship is, and working back from there. So we work on a kind of tactical periodization or vertical integration model where we try and avoid having high sessions back to back within the week. So typically we'll have our high session, we'll try and get 72 hours of recovery between where we can, and then the next session is a little bit lower and maybe more technical focus. So that's kind of where we are from a minor and 20s perspective in terms of our planning. Can we have a high session on maybe a Tuesday where we're stressing them from maybe a high speed running perspective, or intensity interval training perspective, and maybe a speed exposure? Then Friday it might be more technical, tactical orientated around puck outs or principles of play or patterns of play. So ultimately you're trying to mesh in the energy demands of the game within the week where you can, where it's safe. And again, that high, medium, low model seems to work well, where we're avoiding training within a red zone back to back, close within the week, and we're still trying to expose our players to the capacities they're going to need to perform within the game. So they need to be quick, they need to be robust, they need to be aerobically conditioned. So how can we maybe structure our pre-season to give them enough aerobic conditioning? How can we maybe use games when we're in season to give them a bit of a conditioning stimulus? And how can we make sure that they are getting exposed to speed within the week to try and make sure that they're maintaining their speed, but also trying to reduce intensity or burden of soft tissue risk. So look, I know I've rabbled on a little bit there, but I think that's a model that seems to work well. And again, it's give and take. tell players, look, we're going to load you for 3 weeks. We'll have a week of downtime. Go hard for those 3 weeks, and we'll build you up and build you back down again.
That's really good. There was no ramble there. Two follow-ons, I'll give them to you together. First of all, around the conditioning, are you using games or isolated running or a combination of the two? And secondly, how do you factor in gym work into that? Is it still done through schools, or is there some group gym stuff done?
Yeah, so conditioning, I suppose, my philosophy is it needs to be a meshed approach. I think games are great, but you still need to have a little bit of isolated conditioning within the season to ensure that they're getting enough of a stimulus high-speed running wise. I think a strength of Damien's and Conor Ryan, who worked with me with the 20s, is their design of games with the bigger picture of what a worst case scenario within a match looks like is really good. So we try and use games within the season where we can, and then if there are players that maybe need a little bit of a top up external to that, we'll do that. I think that the key caveat there being if you condition everything through the games, you're possibly not giving them enough of a stimulus, certainly for max speed and potentially high speed running. So going back to your game design there, is it very much small 4v4s, acceleration, deceleration loader? Is there enough of a distance to maybe stretch from high speed running wise? So that goes back to, I suppose, communication with coaches and Coach Ed, that look, we'll condition through the game where we can, but if there is maybe something that we're missing that we need to do external, we'll do that. Gym wise then, I suppose that the minors and 20s wouldn't, naturally enough, the 20s aren't in school, so they'll have their collective session. The minors, a lot of them are in school, but they will have a collective session as well. We try where we can to, I suppose with the 20s we would have had 2 collective gym sessions in the week. We try and do a heavy session maybe after a heavy pitch session straight away to try and aggregate that recovery a little bit, and then maybe have another supplementary session within the week. But again, I suppose the beauty of what you're doing on the pitch and in the gym is happening when you're not training. So we try and prioritise recovery and rest where we can, but definitely stressing where we can as well, and trying to pick the right points in the week and in the season to do that. And again, it's the game design is the key there from the conditioning. So are we overloading with maybe a 5v3 to get some sort of a stimulus, or are we underloading, or what are we doing? And I think if you take that umbrella stepper model back, you can have the same game but multiple iterations of it to stress different energy systems. So again, look, the coach education and the planning piece is key there for that.
Yeah, I'm all about those pitch and gym sessions coupled together. I think you just get so much more quality recovery time if you're smart about how you design those based off each other. Something I know I had a previous conversation with Michal around this. In Clare, you seem very strong at keeping your coaches from the squads through to minor and 20, or filtering back in again. Without giving away loads of secrets, why is that?
Yeah, I suppose getting to minor finals helps ultimately. While the key indicator for us is how many of those boys can we get playing with their clubs and get into 20s and get to seniors, it is an easier sell to coaches to get involved if they know that, we were in a minor final this year, we were in an under 20 Munster final, we were in a Munster final at senior football level. So it is a little bit easier to recruit coaches when it's more of an attractive proposition to get involved. So I think that's important too. But I think the big thing is we value people, and we try and target people who have Clare's best interests in mind. So like across the codes and across the squads, we don't have anyone who's in there to say, right, I'm going to do a 6 month nearly internship here and go for a minor or a senior job. They're there to develop the players and develop talent as best they can. And if down the line, in Ger O'Connell's case, a minor job or a 20s job opens up, well then, they've had a really good exposure over 3 or 4 years to go for that. I think that's a strength of our system too, and that Ger has been involved from a development perspective. So when he gets to 17s and maybe there is a performance element involved, he gets that meshed approach too. So look, our KPIs keep people involved. If that's players or coaches, it remains the same. Again, it's a really enjoyable environment to be a part of as a full-time staff member, and it's definitely an enjoyable place to be as a coach as well. It's not a massive time constraint on them when they're here. They're valued, they're involved, they're involved in session planning. They aren't just handed a session plan and an activity and said, here, you implement that. They're valued and their opinion is valued. I think when you have that, you'll keep people involved. So I think it's probably a multitude of things, but again, it's a good environment to be in. It's a positive environment and people feel valued, and if people feel valued, they'll probably stay in it.
And like, you're a bit of an example that you were S&C with the under-20s a few years ago and you've come into more of a full-time role. Like, for starters, why did you want to go not straight from, but kind of step up the chain a little bit? But also, were there bits from when you were an S&C with a team that you saw, okay, if I was up a level, there are definitely things I would put in place to either make things better or a bit smoother? Not things were like bad before or anything, but just from a smoothness perspective, is it easier to go from internal sometimes up a bit to just have that bit more of a hands-on knowledge?
I think it is. I think it's a strength of our system that, the vast majority of our people are Clare people, so look, they probably have an insider knowledge of what's going on. I suppose I did 3 years in Laois and a couple of years with Camogie, and Rob got me back into Clare, and I was really excited to be a part of that. And yeah, I did a couple of years with 20s before taking on this role, which I suppose gave me a unique insight in that now I'm looking from 14s up as opposed to 20s down. So I've seen, I suppose, the transition, and it's a big jump from minor to 20s. We had success in the minor All-Ireland a couple of years ago, and some of those boys have struggled to make the jump, whereas other boys who mightn't have been involved in that, are flourishing now. So those 3 boys I referenced earlier, so that kind of couple of years within that space gave me an insight into the importance of bridging that gap from 17s to 20s. So I think the big learning I took was we have a decent transition from an athletic development perspective from 17s to 18s to 20s in hurling. We don't have that at the minute in football, and that's the area of focus we're going after to try and, again, the minors did really well at the football this year, and it's important now that we retain those boys. Not all of them are going to make the jump to 20 straight away. There's a massive jump physically, but also technically from 17s to 20s, even more so senior at certain times. So the key thing for us is trying to keep those boys engaged and involved now as they turn 18 and 19, so that by the time they're under 20, they're ready to step in. And that's the strength of our system in hurling at the minute. We had that with those Celtic Challenge boys I referenced. So I suppose that was an area of focus of mine starting into the role, is can we try and replicate that at football? Look, it's a numbers game at the end of the day. Demographically, the vast majority of the football population is from an area in Clare that is starting to maybe dwindle because of rural depopulation. So we need to try and keep those players we have involved and maximise what we do have. We're doing well from a football perspective, so it's trying to ultimately try and maximise that talent that's there at 17s and get them through to playing 20s and playing with their club and hopefully clear long term down the line.
Do you think the step from 17 to 20 is bigger than the previous one from 18 to 21? I know you weren't involved in, but
yeah, I think so. I think physically there's a massive step, even dealing with the difference. When they're at 17, you're dealing with them through their parents, whereas when they're 20s, that comfort blanket's gone. So look, it's a massive jump physically for sure, but even psychologically it's huge as well. There's a big difference between a 17 and an 18-year-old. We wouldn't have transitioned a massive amount of last year's minors into the 20s this year, and it's very much related to that physical difference, but psychologically too there's a big jump, and it's maybe something the GAA possibly need to reassess, I would think.
Last bit, and I'm happy to spend a bit of time on this. I'd said to you ages ago about coming on, and what gave me the push to actually contact you again was I saw you had to post about a bio-banding match yourselves. Some of the Clare underage teams played Wexford underage teams in bio-banding games. Just sake it, I know absolutely nothing about what this is. Explain to me, what are bio-banding games? Why do you do them? What are the positives? What are potential negatives? All like that.
Yeah, so again, we're trying to give our academy squad players an exposure to a vast array of challenges, be it from a football and hurling perspective and also an athletic perspective. So bio-banding is one little part of that. So I suppose in essence, or in layman's terms, instead of streaming games by chronological age, so under 14, under 15, under 16, you look at their biological age. So we, as you mentioned there, we did a bio-banded event with Wexford maybe 3 weeks ago at under 14. So we played 2 games at both codes. We had an early developers game and a late developers game. So we would have done a lot of work over Easter in getting our players in and getting them tested. And part of that was getting their maturation profile done. So we were able to split our squads based on where they were in terms of their percentage adult height and how close they were to being fully grown. So Owen and Wexford contacted me maybe back in April to see if it's something we could run with. So they carried similar numbers to ourselves. They had a similar proportion of early and late developers as ourselves in both codes. So we said we'd run with it. We'd play an early v early game in both codes, a late v late game in both codes. We videoed it. We put GPS on them, so we had a really good insight from, again, a man's perspective physically, but also technically and tactically. So we're currently doing a little bit of analysis on what the differences were, and Toby Falconer in Wexford, he's a genius on performance analysis. He's put together some really good insight on simple things like, for example, the early developers. So they're those who are physically more developed at 14. They're closer to being adults than the late developers. The shot map of where they took their shots from was a lot more kamikaze than the late developer. So the late developer was a little bit more definite and deliberate with where he was shooting from, because I suppose if we relate it back to the game, they might, in a normal game where it's based on age, they might only get 1 or 2 shots a game. So they want to make sure that they're scoring from it. Whereas an early developer who's getting on the ball all the time and he's running up and down the middle channel of the pitch and getting loads of shots, he's maybe not as deliberate with where he's shooting from. So just a little insight like that can help with your coaching practice then. So the real advantage of bio-banding is within a training setting where, if we want to work on defensive skills, for example, it's probably not best at under 14, if you're solely focusing on developing your competency to defend, to put an early developer with a late developer. So putting a 6 foot guy with a 5 foot guy in a defensive situation, the 6 foot guy is probably going to overpower him physically, and not because he's a better defender. So if you want to solely focus on developing their defensive prowess or their attacking prowess, then stripping away that physical advantage or disadvantage is an opportunity to do that. Now, I suppose it's not something we'll do all the time. It's a meshed approach, because we do have late developers who aren't ever going to be taller than I am, which is 170 centimetres. So when they get to adult, they're going to face guys who are 6 foot plus and bigger than them. So they still need to be exposed to that. But we want to try and give those guys a chance that they're able to express their skill level without a physical disadvantage. But also for the early developers, like typically they'll play 3, 6, 8, 9, 11, 14 central channels, running straight lines. But by the time they get to minor and that physical advantage maybe is gone a little bit, they might end up being an inside forward. So now, do they have the patience to stay in there? Are they making lateral runs? What does that look like? Whereas what we're finding with the late developers in those games, they tend to have a little bit more patience to stay inside, and they tend to be a little bit more deliberate and clever with how they're making their runs and creating space for themselves. So that's a real advantage to why we monitor growth and maturation. If we were to only pick 30 players at under 14, the chances are you'd probably pick the 30 early developers, and we discard the late developer, the Podge Collins, the Shane O'Donnell, who has developed a really good game IQ of being a really good inside forward. So we're trying to make sure that we keep those lads involved. Again, we're trying to future-proof talent, not fast-track it. And then for the early developers who are physically developed at 14, can we challenge them that they're not just playing in central areas and they're not just bulldozing through players, that maybe they're having to be a little bit more deliberate, they're having to play something as simple as playing at 10 or 12 instead of playing at 11. There's a big difference there. So that's where it works really well, and I think that's why it's important maybe within the year to have a couple of bio-band games where even something as simple as when we were going through the under 14 footballers, and we had 44 on the day, so with 2 pounds of 22 roughly, give or take. And on the late developers, of those 22, up until that point I think we played 4 academy games. Only one of those 22 had played in a central area of the pitch. So that day against Wexford you had 8 players now playing 3, 6, 8, 9, 11, 14. So that's great for them because they're playing in an area that maybe they wouldn't get that chance at a club or in a traditional county game. So yeah, it's a part of what we do. It's not something we do all the time, but it's definitely something that's advantageous. But there's also, I suppose, maybe there's pros and cons to it too.
Because if you just look at it in even 2 distinct areas, the early developers are more likely to be picked, but in the long term probably won't develop as well because they depend on their size too much. And I saw it working with development squads, even just particularly, I don't know why my club, we don't seem to grow many big lads, but we often play against big lads. And you can see, at under 14, there's this absolute star, and by mine or 20, they're just not as good because they depended so much on their size. They didn't develop all the other skills around it. And on the flip side, a small player who hasn't developed yet but gets picked and is patient with their own development and not getting frustrated with being knocked off the ball ends up being a far better player because they develop all these game IQ bits, movement skills. They can just solve more challenges with a variety of different answers to questions, we'll say. And then if they do get a growth spurt, they have this growth spurt underpinning all the movement skills and challenges and solutions to problems that came across them. A clubmate of mine, Conor Shannon, he was always small growing up, and then he got a growth spurt around 18 or 19. He's really good now. One of Carlo's better forwards, and it's because he was good at staying patient when he was younger. He didn't. God, the chap got really frustrated at times when he was small and being pushed around, but he developed so many ways out of situations. Then, because he decides to go along with it, he ends up way better. Your point there on the early developers having shots from more places, I often wonder, is that a bit because even though they're early developers, they're still relatively new to this new body, and they might just not be aware of where their limitations lie. I'm gone big and strong, I can definitely put it over from 65, and then drop short to 21, okay, maybe not. Sometimes I think there's a little bit more there, whereas their late developers, they've just spent more time being that size and being that strength, so they've actually identified their range and limitations a bit quicker. I don't know, numerous things there, I suppose.
Yeah, and even on that point, one of my good friends growing up, I think it's an interesting point too on how coaches perceive maybe a player's position based on their stature. So one of my good friends growing up, he was 6'1" or 2" at 14. So the natural inclination was we put him midfield, and we used to rain kickouts on him. And if he didn't catch it or if he dropped it at half time, he'd be like, "Geez, why aren't you catching the ball?" But he was probably never coached how to actually catch the ball, or maybe how to time to run and jump to win a kick out. But because he was taller, it was perceived that, geez, he'll be a great midfielder. So it's adding that other layer to that. Fionn Fitz's research on the eyes don't have it, that kind of thing. That's something that we're aware of too with our talent ID, that we're not just picking on opinion. We're trying to objectify it where we can. But yeah, I think the shooting thing is interesting. That those early developers, they probably backed themselves a little bit more to shoot from anywhere.
And you've mentioned why you do it and not doing it too much. Are there any potential drawbacks, or would you be wary of any counties looking to implement this, not to go all in it and fully group them and keep them separated?
Yeah, look, again, I suppose maybe a misconception is that we'll assume that a late developer is going to grow to 6'2", but that's not the case. So we have late developers in the system who are maybe 150 centimetres now, but will never grow to more than 165. So they still need to be exposed to what they're going to face when they're minors and adults, and that is physical and size disadvantage. So it's for that reason, it's not something you do all the time. It's something you do every once in a while. And I suppose you need to have a real context and a why you're doing it. So for us, it looks like splitting them into their biobands in training if we're doing something that's related to tackling or defending or defensive skills again, every once in a while, that if we want to actually develop their ability to defend really well and tackle really well, then again, if you have that physical advantage over someone, you're probably just going to foul them or push them or pull them. So I think having the context and having a real why behind why you're doing it is important. Then the other thing is the parents' education piece too. Like that's a real important thing that I think before a county would implement it, that you do inform the parents why you're doing it, because I know myself, if I was 14 and I was put into a late developers group, my parents might perceive that to be a threat, or geez, why do you think my son is smaller, or that kind of thing. So just being wary there around the education of why it's an advantage for your son. I think that's the key, and even for coaches as well, that they understand why you're doing it, and why it can help them and help their coaching practice. So even the shooting insight that Toby had for us, then that'll help the coaches that, okay, I'll have the early developers first station on Saturday. Maybe I'll work on identifying where's my shooting range and things like that. So it's just trying to improve practice, and it's not the be all and end all. It's another cog in the wheel of talent development, and it's underpinned by that philosophy of, can we keep as many involved? Can we transition them through? Can we make sure that they play adult for their clubs? Because it'll be a real shame if they didn't. The more that we get playing adult with their clubs, then byproduct is our county team is going to be better and our club championship is going to be better. So that's the bigger picture view of it, I suppose.
And how much effort is involved in the bio-bandit?
Yeah, that's the other side. I suppose we've put a nice little bit of, we're in the middle of putting a nice resource together. Jack Cooney got a videographer down for the day, and myself and Owen did a couple of interviews, and we're putting together a couple of resources on, okay, so the 7th of June was our end point in our games, but how do we get to that point? So I suppose we have 300 players within the system, so it's a case of getting their height and weight, getting their parents' height, getting that into a formula to get what their predicted adult height is, then streaming appropriately based on early developers, mid PHV, post PHV. So there is a nice little bit. It's not something that you could just rock up on a Saturday morning, look at your under 14s and say, right, he's probably a late developer, he's probably an early developer, we'll put them over there. It's not an exact science, but it's certainly not a science where you can guess either. You have to try and put some bit of structure on it. So I suppose it's getting those anthropometric measurements and doing that regularly and often to make sure that it's up to date. Like some of the guys that in the under 14 football, that they're going to be involved in bio-banded games again the weekend, they've actually gone from, one of them was 87% of his predicted adult height against Wexford, now he's 91. So if you don't keep that updated as well, then the value of it potentially diminishes too. So like anything, it's making sure it's not dead data that you're keeping on top of it.
And is there any kind of end point where you're like, look, they're probably all close to where they're going to be, or they're within, there's a narrower range from earliest to latest developer, like by the end of under 15 you kind of like probably not much benefit to it here, bar maybe one player needs something a bit different? Yeah,
like we're typically seeing that it's happening around, so our 14s are in the system now, 8 months maybe. A lot of them are starting to approach that peak height velocity or are posted. So the 15s, a lot of them will have hit it, or in the middle of it. Some haven't. So maybe for those guys, like I can picture a couple of them in my head, it might be a good thing to have a bio-banded day within our academy squads where 14s mix with 15s and have another layer to it like that. I think by 16s it's definitely started to even itself out, but 15s you'll start to see the windows and the bands close up fairly significantly and quite fast.
Because you will have the odd outlier, like from watching The Last Dance, was it Scottie Pippen and Rodman were really they were like 1920 before they had their last stage of growth spurt, but that's far rare. Like they're complete outliers in that sense. The other bit, your previous role at Camogie, like I know a few people have suggested, like, is it worth looking at there? By age 14 in females, it tend to be a lot closer to their adult height as opposed to males. They just tend to mature that bit earlier physically.
Yeah. They typically hit they typically hit maturation a little bit earlier than males.
Physically, emotionally, much earlier.
Yeah, yes. Like I suppose a big thing to get across is it's probably a cherry on top thing. It's much more important to have your coaching structures right first. Like it's irrelevant. Look, if you had bio-banded but you're still putting them in lines and drills, then the value of it probably isn't there. So once you're coaching right, I think maybe it's something you could possibly look at. But it's definitely not it's a low hanging fruit in some ways in terms of maybe squad selection. But I think there's a lot of other bits and pieces that need to be right before you go after it too.
No, that's excellent, Conor. Any other little bits you want to follow up on there, or other bits for your role coming down the tracks we should be keeping an eye out for?
Yeah, I suppose I'm interested to see how the output from our event with Wexford comes. So as I said, with a videographer there, we interviewed parents and players and coaches pre and post games, and even just standing to the side of a few of the early developers, post their game. They spoke very eloquently on recognising the difference to a regular chronological game, that they weren't able to blast up the centre anymore, that they had to maybe think a little bit more on the ball. So it's amazing how competent they are at reflecting and having that self-reflection too, that I had to challenge my skill set a little bit. So hopefully that'll be a nice resource for counties and clubs to have a look at and maybe implement in their own setting. But again, it's a small cog in the wheel, and we're trying to use it as a way of future proofing and not fast tracking players.
Excellent, Conor. Thank you very much for your time today, and hopefully when you do get some of the big finds of that, we might do a follow up or with one of the others that are involved.
Yeah, absolutely.